They locked him away for 27 years, trying to crush his body and bury his voice. But when Nelson Mandela walked out of prison, he carried no bitterness, only forgiveness. He had entered as a prisoner and emerged as the man who would free his people. This is the story of a man who turned chains into courage and ended apartheid without firing a single shot. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was born on the 18th of July, 1918, in the tiny village of Mvezo, in the rolling hills of the Transkei region, South Africa. His given name in Xhosa, Rolihlahla, literally meant pulling the branch of a tree, but it was also used to mean troublemaker. No one knew then how prophetic that name would become. He belonged to the Thembu royal family, descendants of kings, but his childhood was one of simplicity, herding cattle, drinking from streams, and listening to stories of bravery told by village elders beside the fire. From his mother, he learned humility. From his father, a local chief who lost his title for challenging colonial authority, he learned defiance. When his father died, young Mandela was taken in by Chief Jongintaba Dalindyebo, the acting regent of the Thembu people. For the first time, he entered a world of both privilege and pressure, where leadership meant service, not domination. The chief sent him to a Methodist mission school, where a teacher gave him an English name, Nelson, a mark of colonial assimilation that would follow him all his life. At the mission, he was introduced to British discipline, Christianity, and Western ideals of justice. But the contrast between what he learned in books and what he saw in reality grew sharper every day. He read about fairness and equality, yet watched his people live under laws that treated them as inferiors in their own land. As a teenager, Mandela absorbed two opposing worlds: the proud traditions of his ancestors and the rigid systems of colonial control. He saw that education could open doors, but also that those doors were guarded by race. While others studied to fit into the system, he began dreaming of changing it. One evening, sitting beneath the African sky, he asked his friend, "Why do they rule us if we are the same?" It was a child's question, but it carried the seed of a revolution. By the time he left the regent's home to attend college, Rolihlahla Mandela had already become more than a name. He was a young man, quietly preparing to trouble the conscience of an entire nation. In 1939, Mandela enrolled at Fort Hare University, one of the few institutions open to black South Africans. It was a place of learning and of awakening. There he met other bright minds who dreamed of a different country, one free from the iron bars of apartheid that were already forming. He studied law, history, and politics, but the lectures were not what shaped him most. It was the debates in crowded dorm rooms, the late-night talks about justice and dignity. Fort Hare became a furnace where ideas of resistance were forged. When the university administration tried to impose an undemocratic student council, Mandela and his friends refused to submit. They staged a boycott, demanding the right to choose their own representatives. For his defiance, he was expelled. It was the first time Mandela lost his freedom for standing by his principles, but not the last. He fled to Johannesburg, a city of gold built on the backs of black laborers. There, he saw the full brutality of racial segregation. Signs read, "Europeans only." Black men were forced to carry passbooks to move through their own land. Police patrols beat workers for walking on the wrong street. The illusion of harmony shattered. To survive, Mandela took jobs as a clerk and later found work as a law apprentice under a liberal Jewish attorney. For the first time, he encountered people who treated him as an equal. It was there he decided that law was not just a profession, it was a weapon against injustice. Johannesburg was also where he met Walter Sisulu, a real estate agent with a quiet intensity and a vision for freedom. Sisulu introduced him to the African National Congress, ANC, and to a world of political activism. Mandela, the rural boy once called troublemaker, now stood on the threshold of a far greater storm. Each experience, the expulsion, the humiliation, the friendships, became lessons in courage. And in a country built to break the spirit of black men, Mandela's will only grew stronger. By 1944, Johannesburg was boiling with unrest, and Nelson Mandela had found his purpose. That year, together with Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo, and Anton Lembede. He helped form the African National Congress Youth League, ANCY, a movement of young men and women who rejected patience and compromise. They demanded direct action, not polite petitions. They believed the time for waiting had ended. Mandela's voice began to rise, calm, measured, but firm. He spoke in meetings held in cramped halls and dusty streets, telling the people that freedom would not be given. It had to be taken. The Youth League drafted a new manifesto calling for boycotts, strikes, and civil disobedience against unjust laws. It was a radical idea in a nation where even speaking of equality could cost a man his life. In 1952, the Defiance Campaign was launched. Thousands of black South Africans deliberately violated apartheid regulations, entering whites-only zones, refusing to carry passbooks, defying curfews. Mandela, by then the national volunteer-in-chief, was arrested several times. His law firm, Mandela and Tambo, became one of the first in the country to serve the black population, defending those beaten, jailed, or silenced by the regime. For a while, he still believed in nonviolent resistance, inspired by Gandhi's principles. But the government's cruelty grew. Protesters were shot in the streets. Children were jailed. Mandela began to see that peaceful protest alone could not dismantle a system built on violence. As apartheid tightened its grip, he faced a terrible truth. To defend peace, one might need to fight. He said later, "A freedom fighter learns the hard way that it is the oppressor who defines the nature of the struggle." In 1961, the African National Congress, under Mandela's leadership, formed its armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, the Spear of the Nation. Its mission was not to kill, but to sabotage, to strike at symbols of oppression without taking innocent lives. To the government, he became the Black Pimpernel, a phantom who appeared and vanished, a man who could no longer walk openly through his own land. To his people, he was a beacon. Freedom had found its soldier, and the boy called Troublemaker had now become the man the empire most feared. The 1,950 seconds turned into a decade of persecution. The apartheid state declared open war on dissent. Mandela's movements were tracked, his phones tapped, his home raided at night, yet he refused to flee. Instead, he went underground, moving between safe houses, wearing disguises, sleeping on floors. Newspapers began calling him the Black Pimpernel for his ability to disappear moments before the police arrived. He traveled the country secretly, organizing strikes and teaching volunteers discipline, not chaos. In 1962, he left South Africa for the first time, meeting African leaders abroad, seeking support for the struggle. He visited Ethiopia, Egypt, and Ghana, where he received military training. When he returned, the government was waiting. He was arrested near Howick, accused of inciting strikes and leaving the country illegally. But that was only the beginning. In 1963, police raided a farm in Rivonia, uncovering documents that tied Mandela and others to plans of sabotage. The Rivonia trial followed a moment that would define his life. The prosecution demanded death sentences. Mandela knew his fate was sealed. Yet, when he stood in court to speak, he delivered words that shook the conscience of the world. "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." The courtroom fell silent. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment. As he was led away, Mandela did not bow his head. His wife, Winnie, raised her fist. He smiled faintly, not in defiance, but in peace. He had crossed the threshold from freedom into legend. On the 12th of June 1964, Nelson Mandela was sent to Robben Island, a barren rock surrounded by freezing ocean currents. The government thought it had silenced him forever. They did not understand they had only given him a new battlefield. Robben Island lay just off the coast of Cape Town, beautiful from afar, brutal up close. Surrounded by icy Atlantic waters and patrolled by sharks, it was the perfect place to make men disappear. Nelson Mandela arrived there in 1964, wearing prison uniform number 466, over 64, the 466th prisoner of that year. His cell measured barely 2 meters by 2, a thin mattress on the floor, a bucket for a toilet, a small barred window letting in the salt air. Each morning at 5:30, guards would bang the iron doors. The prisoners were marched to the limestone quarry where they spent their days breaking rocks under a merciless sun. The dust burned their eyes and lungs. Years later, Mandela's eyesight would never recover from the glare of the white stone. Food was meager, rationed by race. African prisoners received less than Indians or colored inmates. Letters from home were rare and heavily censored. Sentences like, "I miss you," were blacked out by prison authorities. Mandela's mother died while he was incarcerated. Later, so did his eldest son. He was denied permission to attend either funeral. The purpose of Robben Island was not just to confine the body but to crush the spirit. Yet Mandela refused to break. He straightened his back each morning, swept his cell, and carried himself like a statesman, even when wearing chains. When guards mocked him, he answered with calm dignity. Over time, they began to lower their voices around him. He observed everything: how power functioned, how fear was enforced, how small kindnesses could disarm cruelty. Gradually, the prisoners built a community of endurance. They organized secret meetings, shared scraps of news, and supported one another through sickness and isolation. Mandela often reminded them, "Each stone we lift is a step toward our freedom." He spent 18 years on Robben Island. His hair turned gray, his body aged, but his resolve sharpened. In that desolation, he discovered a kind of freedom no prison could take mastery over his own anger. When asked later how he endured, Mandela said, "Prison is itself a microcosm of society. If you can learn to manage your emotions, respect others, and win over those who hate you, then you are already a free man." By the time the guards realized it, the prisoner they sought to humiliate had become their teacher. Robben Island became more than a jail, it became a classroom. The men imprisoned there, many of them leaders of the African National Congress, turned their confinement into what they called the University of Robben Island. Mandela was one of its principal professors. In the yard, during lunch breaks, they discussed politics, law, and history. They recited speeches, practiced diplomacy, and planned for the South Africa that would one day rise beyond the bars. Those who arrived angry or radicalized left disciplined, patient, and educated. Books were banned, but somehow they appeared smuggled in through sympathetic warders or disguised as religious texts. Mandela read voraciously Shakespeare, Marx, Tolstoy, and biographies of world leaders. He studied not only their victories but their failures. He learned how patience could outlast oppression. The inmates spoke in whispers, using coded language to pass messages from one block to another. Through secret networks, they communicated with the outside world and the underground ANC. Mandela became the invisible heartbeat of the resistance. The authorities noticed. Offers of release began to come, conditional ones. "Renounce violence," they said. "Admit your struggle was wrong, and you can go home." Each time, Mandela refused. "What freedom is there?" he asked, "if I must trade my people's liberty for my own?" Decades passed. Guards came and went, some brutal, some curious. One of them, a young Afrikaner, once asked Mandela, "How can you not hate us?" Mandela looked at him and replied, "Hate clouds the mind. It gets in the way of strategy." He treated even his captors with respect, not submission. Slowly, astonishingly, some of them began to respect him back. By the late 1972, Robben Island had changed. The men who entered as prisoners had become leaders. The guards who came to dominate them had become their students. Mandela was eventually moved to Pollsmoor prison, where the walls were higher, but the rules less strict. There, he began a quiet dialogue with government officials who feared the growing unrest across the country. It was not yet negotiation, but the first tremor of what would become reconciliation. He had entered prison as a revolutionary. Now, behind bars, he was learning to become a statesman. The world outside was changing, and soon, so would South Africa. By the early 1000s, 980 seconds, the world was beginning to shift. The apartheid regime that had seemed immovable for decades was starting to tremble. South Africa was drowning in sanctions, its economy suffocating under global isolation. In Europe and America, students boycotted South African goods. Musicians, athletes, and governments joined a growing chorus demanding, "Free Nelson Mandela." Inside his cell, Mandela could not hear the chanting crowds, but he could feel the tremor of history moving. From smuggled newspapers, he read about international protests, about the exiled ANC keeping the flame alive. He saw that the resistance had grown far beyond the borders of his country. It had become a global moral cause. But at home, the struggle was brutal. The government responded to dissent with bullets and fire. Townships burned. Children were arrested. Mandela's image was still banned in South African media. Even his face could not be shown. Yet people drew his likeness from memory on walls and posters. The man they tried to erase had become the symbol of their endurance. Mandela's years in prison had taught him patience, but not passivity. From Pollsmoor, he began writing letters not only to his comrades but also to government ministers. He spoke of negotiation, not surrender, and of a future where both sides could coexist without bloodshed. To some in the movement, it sounded like compromise. To Mandela, it was strategy. He understood that victory through vengeance would destroy the very dream they fought for. In 1988, he was transferred again, this time to Victor Verster prison, a sign the regime was softening. His cell now had a small garden, where he tended vegetables and thought about the nation's future. Guards no longer barked orders, they listened when he spoke. Even his jailers knew. Keeping Mandela locked away had become more dangerous than setting him free. Then came the turning point. President P.W. Botha suffered a stroke. His successor, F.W. de Klerk, realized that the apartheid system could no longer survive. On the 2nd of February 1990, de Klerk announced the unbanning of the ANC and the imminent release of Nelson Mandela. 9 days later, on the 11th of February 1990, the prison gates opened. Mandela, now 71, walked out slowly, hand in hand with Winnie. The world held its breath. Cameras clicked, crowds surged, tears streamed. His fist rose not in anger, but in triumph. He had entered those gates, a prisoner of the state. He walked out a prisoner of history and its author. Freedom had finally come, but peace had not. South Africa in 1990 was a nation teetering on the edge of civil war. Decades of hatred and blood had created wounds too deep to close overnight. Armed militias patrolled the streets. The old regime still clung to power, and some of Mandela's own comrades demanded vengeance. It was in that storm that Mandela revealed his greatest strength, not the will to fight, but the will to forgive. He began secret meetings with his former enemies, including de Klerk and generals who had once ordered his imprisonment. Those conversations were tense, cautious, and dangerous. But Mandela insisted that negotiation was not weakness, it was the highest form of courage. He listened, as much as he spoke. He sought not to humiliate the oppressors, but to help them find a way to release their fear. "If you want to make peace with your enemy," he once said, "you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner." In 1993, after years of back-and-forth talks, Mandela and de Klerk stood together to announce the end of apartheid and the beginning of democratic elections. For their efforts, they shared the Nobel Peace Prize. Many saw that moment as history's redemption. A man once condemned as a terrorist, now honored as a peacemaker. Yet, even then, Mandela faced immense pressure. Violence continued in the streets. Extremists on both sides tried to sabotage peace. When Chris Hani, a popular anti-apartheid leader, was assassinated in 1993, riots erupted. South Africa was minutes from collapse. Mandela went on national television, calm but unflinching. "Tonight, I am reaching out to every South African, black and white, from the depths of my being. A white man, full of prejudice and hate, has killed a man who embodied the ideals of freedom. We must not allow them to destroy the country we have fought to build." His voice steadied the nation. The riots faded. For the first time, Even his enemies saw in him something greater than politics, moral authority. He emerged from those years not just as a revolutionary, but as a reconciler. The man who had once led the underground resistance was now leading an entire people toward the light. Mandela had freed his country from chains, now he had to teach it how to walk. On the 27th of April 1994, millions of South Africans queued for hours under the sun, their fingers stained with purple ink, the mark of their first free vote. Old men wept. Women sang freedom songs that had been banned for decades. For the first time in history, black and white citizens stood side by side at the ballot box. When the results came, it was not even close. Nelson Mandela, the prisoner once branded a traitor, had been elected as the first black president of South Africa. The world watched in awe as he walked into the Union buildings in Pretoria, the same marble halls that had once been closed to his race, and raised his hand to take the oath of office. I, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, do hereby swear to be faithful to the Republic of South Africa. Those words carried the weight of centuries. But governing a broken nation was harder than winning its freedom. South Africa was a land haunted by scars. White farmers feared retribution, while black communities demanded justice. Mandela faced the impossible task of healing both the oppressed and the oppressor. He chose forgiveness as policy. Against the advice of some allies, he invited his former jailers to his inauguration. He wore a Springbok rugby jersey, a symbol of white pride, to unite a divided people through sport. And when the world doubted his decision, he replied, "If I can forgive, then why can't they?" One of his most profound acts was the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Instead of vengeance, the nation would confront its horrors openly. Perpetrators of apartheid crimes could confess their actions in exchange for amnesty, and victims could tell their stories in public hearings broadcast across the country. It was not perfect. Some wounds never healed. Some truths were too painful to speak. But for the first time, South Africa chose truth over silence. Mandela's presidency was not about power, it was about moral reconstruction. He reduced his salary, visited orphanages and hospitals, and refused to surround himself with luxury. He was often seen personally serving tea to visitors, a gesture that disarmed even his critics. When asked why he never sought revenge, he answered softly, "Resentment is like drinking poison and hoping it will kill your enemies." His presidency lasted only one term, but his impact outlived any office. He turned the symbol of a divided country into a story of redemption, a miracle born not from force, but from forgiveness. The man who had spent 27 years in a cell had now become the moral compass of humanity. When Mandela stepped down in 1999, he did so willingly, a rare act among leaders of newly freed nations. "I want to rest," he said, "and watch the younger generation take the torch." But even in retirement, he remained the conscience of the world. He devoted his later years to humanitarian work, raising funds to fight HIV, AIDS, supporting education for poor children, and advocating peace across Africa. His frail figure became a symbol of quiet strength. When he entered a room, people fell silent, not out of fear, but reverence. Despite global fame, he lived simply in his rural home in Kunu, tending his garden, greeting neighbors with warmth. He once joked, "I am just an old man who wants to sit under a tree and dream." But his influence reached far beyond that small village. When the world faltered from wars in the Middle East to racial tensions in America, Mandela's words were quoted like scripture. He became a symbol not only of South Africa's freedom, but of humanity's capacity to overcome darkness without becoming it. In 2013, at the age of 95, Nelson Mandela passed away. The news spread across every continent within minutes. In Johannesburg, thousands gathered in the rain to sing his name. World leaders from over 100 countries attended his memorial. Barack Obama called him the last great liberator of the 20th century. Yet the true measure of Mandela's legacy was not in monuments or speeches, but in the quiet transformation of hearts. Millions who had once known only hatred began to believe in forgiveness. Mandela had shown that a single life, lived with courage and humility, could rewire the moral fabric of a nation. He turned vengeance into vision and chains into light. In the end, he left behind not an empire, but an example. And his voice, calm, steady, unbroken, still echoes through history. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Nelson Mandela entered the world as Rolihlahla, the troublemaker. He left it as Madiba, the father of a nation, and the keeper of humanity's better self.